We're learning the Maamar Byom Ashtei. Also, we're middle of chapter 11. We're on page 262. I want to read this long English note going on to 263 because I believe it will clarify what we're talking about here. So let's begin. The concept that Rebbe is explaining here is the following: that the faith, the emunah that the neshama has in choosing Hashem is strengthened, becomes greater when it impacts the mind as well, not to exclude the mind. And that's how he explains the midrash that he chose. There was choice here, because l'cha'ira, if it's coming from the soul, it's not a matter of choice, it's who you are. So he says that's true, but it even becomes a greater benefit when it impacts the mind vis-a-vis the choice. That's the theme, the nakuda. And now let's read the note that he gives a nice example, the editor, Rabbi Tauger. In another Maamar, the last line on page 262, in another Maamar, the Rebbe speaks of individuals who displayed Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, continuously for many years when they were living in a country where oppressive decrees conflicted with the observance of Torah and its mitzvahs, namely Russia, okay? When, however, these same individuals came to a free country where they could observe the Torah and the mitzvahs without external challenges, the Mesiras Nefesh, which they previously displayed, was not necessarily manifest as prominently in their conduct. Why is this possible? Because the Mesiras Nefesh they expressed throughout their years stemmed from a revelation of the higher encompassing powers of the soul that transcended their inward powers. In other words, the neshama was on fire, was lit. They were operating based on soul. Hence, although this revelation spurred these individuals to deeds which were truly lofty, it did not elevate the people themselves. You hear this, Chevra? You could do sometimes very great things. You're talking about Mesiras Nefesh in Russia. We're talking about do or die. And the Rebbe says it doesn't yet mean that it changes who you are. That's makif. Makif is very powerful. It's very influential, it's very great, but it doesn't mean it changes you. As individuals, let's continue. They remained on the same spiritual level as before. The self-sacrifice they showed had no direct effect on the functioning of their hearts and minds, how they operate within the framework of their inward powers. How is this possible? Right? Because two different potentials were involved. Their self-sacrifice reflected the encompassing powers of the soul, potentials above the person's self, while their inward powers of thoughts and feelings defined their actual day-to-day selves. Even though their self-sacrifice expressed the encompassing powers of the soul, it did not transform their conscious powers entirely. Nevertheless, in an ultimate sense, when the essence of the soul, as it is rooted in Hashem's essence, is expressed, no such dichotomy can exist. Right? The essence of a Jew's soul must permeate his inward powers as well, because the essence of a person's being does not allow for the existence of anything else within his personality, right? If you're talking about essence, what does essence mean? Essence means this is who I am, and this is the way it is. Thus, the fundamental expression of the essence of the soul is when it permeates the person's intellect, and through the intellect, every other dimension and personality. At that point, all dichotomies are erased, for the essence pervades and remakes the person's entire character, causing every dimension of the person to reflect the essence of his soul. Similarly, The Maamar here. So this is all based on another Maamar. The last Maamar that we got from the Rebbe before he's had a stroke. This is from the Maamar Atat Tzava, which happens to be the next Maamar, I think, of the book. Anyway, similarly, the Maamar here is emphasizing how the essence of the soul, which stems from the inner dimension of the encompassing light, which is loftier than even the will that transcends logic, which reflects the external dimension of the encompassing light, is expressed when it is drawn down and affects the person's thought itself, the inward light. So in other words, until your thought is or changes, your thought, speech, and action, it's very good, but it's not who you are. To state the concept in terms of the analogy employed by the Midrash. Listen to this. The clever person's choice of Hashem stems from an inherent spiritual connection. Quote, God is my portion, says my soul. That spiritual connection reflects the essence of his being. Therefore, it is drawn down into his intellect to the extent that he can explain his choice logically, giving a rationale. Quote, the others are all subject to replacement. Next page. While the king is not subject to replacement. This indicates that even his selfhood, I love that word, his selfhood, which begins with his intellect, is aligned with an expression, the essential godly core of his being. V'yesh loimar, let's continue now. V'yesh loimar, and we might say, D'zeu gam ma shekosuv chelki Hashem omra nafshi. God is my portion, says my soul. Why does it say chelki dafke, specifically my portion? It could have said, Hashem, he, who nafshi. No, it says chelki, portion. Why is the word portion mentioned here? Listen to this, Chavre. The chelek yibchinas pnimi. When you mention the word portion, chelek, it connotes inwardness. Kidua be'inyan. Matoiv chelkeinu, manoim goraleinu, umayofa yirshasenu. Right? That famous song that there's so many different versions. Ashreinu, matoiv chelkeinu, manoim goraleinu. That's one of the Chabad versions of the song. Anyway, it says, matoiv chelkeinu. How good is our part? So the Rebbe says, we find that the word chelkeinu is used as well. The virtue of the choice made by Jews, choosing God, is when the choice isn't just a soul choice, but the choice also impacts the pnimius, like you used the word before, the selfhood, Havana, Hasaga, that he comprehends and understands. He has it in his bag. He has it in his tools, Yoni, in his way of thinking, a way of speaking. He got it, right? In a manner that it impacts thought, speech, and action. This is the way the inner dimension of God's encompassing light is expressed. So the Rebbe over here answers the question why and how it's not a contradiction between the fact that the choice is coming from the soul, which is meaning there's no real choice. The soul already has decided before that it loves God and wants Hashem. And we are the neshama, because we have a neshama. And simultaneously, together with that, there is the choice coming from the intellect. Because intellect internalizes the soul's will, and even the soul's greater will, the soul, and is expressed through seichel. So what we have from this, before we start the next chapter 12, is that you see this mamish, you see this every day, every single day. People are inspired People are turned on. People to Yiddishkeit, to Torah, to mitzvahs, to chassidus, to whatever. And then when it comes to what we call menschlichkeit, sometimes there's things missing. Okay, we're not going to go into this now. We've spoken about this many times over our years learning together. So that's simply because you're not a mensch, or you're not enough of a mensch. And so refine your character. We're talking here about even a spiritual person. Even the moment you're learning and you're davening, and then it comes time for eating, where's your davening? Where's your learning? Where's your machshava? Where's your higher connection? The answer is, Moshe, it wasn't internalized. In other words, so the Rebbe says, when the clever person says, I choose the king, not the deputies, because they change and the king doesn't change, that's the logical, internalized expression of the soul, which doesn't contradict the soul's natural habitat, which is God. That's the answer to the question that he posed way in the beginning of the Maamar. Next chapter, page 266. Now the Rebbe in this chapter is going to talk about his kapitel Tehillim. And you'll read later the note on the bottom of this page, 103. But briefly, the custom of Chabad is, the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote it too, I believe, to say your kapitel. So if you're 55 years old and you say 56. So the Rebbe in this year, 1971, on the day he said this Maamar, he started his new kapitel Ayin, kapitel 70. Now don't get mixed up. This was 1971. But he becomes 70 in 1972. So which kapitel of Tehillim does he say from 71 to 72? 1971 to 72. Kapitel Ayin, Psalm 70. So the Rebbe over here is going to talk about his psalm, without saying it's his psalm, this year, but everyone knew that. And by the way, that's the way we saw in all the Farbrengens on his birthday, and sometimes even before and after, he would talk about different verses of the Tehillim, or the Midrash on the Tehillim, or the Chassidus on the Tehillim. And just another point that you should know, a Farbrengen on Shabbos usually, not during the week, from 71 on, I believe, or maybe even a few years before, when they made a big deal, about the Rebbe's Yom Haledes, Yud Aleph Nisan. So it started always off 99.9% with a niggin. The Rebbe would come in Shabbos and he would make Kiddush. And after he would make Kiddush, he would nod his head to Rabbi Yoel Khan, who would stand right below to his right, and he could see him. Right, the Rebbe was on a table, on a platform that was like the dais, right. And below there were Hasidim sitting behind him, elder Hasidim, and then below there were tables and benches, and people were sitting. And then there were Bacharim and Yungalite standing all around. That was the physical makeup of the room during the Farbrengen with the Rebbe. Anyway, so he would not have said to Rabbi Yoel, and Rabbi Yoel would start the niggin that Hasidim chose on a certain verse or two of the kapitel Tehillim of the Rebbe for that upcoming year. That was the procedure and the norm as it was. You want to ask something, Hillel? No. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder if you could elaborate on it, make sure I understand. So if the Hasidim knew that the Rebbe was going to be entering, this would have been his 69th year?
Well, no. Well, he was 69, yeah, and he's going to be becoming 70 that upcoming year, 1972.
Right, yeah, okay. So throughout his 69th year, he's saying kapitel 70, right?
In 1971, he was 69, correct.
Okay. I just want to say, I want to say something more, but recently somebody asked me to take on saying a kapitel for 40 days on behalf of somebody looking for a shidduch, and I chose this number 70, so I'm very familiar with it right now.
Oh, okay. Okay, great.
But the other thing that you said, I wanted to just clarify. So if the Hasidim knew that the Rebbe is going to be saying Kapitel 70, they would make up a niggin for a verse in that to kind of like mechazek saying of that kapitel.
Yes.
I understood it. Okay.
And today it continues, and not only in those days there was usually one person or a group of people who like made up the niggin, and everyone went along. Today there's 5, 10, 15 people from Eretz Yisrael, from America, from here, there, and whatever. Anyone can make up a niggin. But in my days, it was pretty much, one niggin that we heard, and we all sang it. And I remember also, I think a year or two, I don't remember when I should take that back. They as the years went on, more people made up nigunim. So, and then I remember once they sang a niggin, and the Rebbe didn't really encourage it with the shaking of his head. It seemed to the Hasidim that it didn't touch him, it didn't move him. So they went the next Shabbos, the next Farbrengen, and they sang another version of a verse, and he shook with his head, and so they felt, oh, this is the song he likes better, and that was a niggin for the year. I remember that. Okay. I'm glad you asked that. I believe it happened once. I have to ask a friend of mine who's a big Baal Menagin, a bigger Baal Menagin, and he knows more about this. But anyway, what you said is correct. This is correct. Let's learn the chapter. Yesh l'kasha zeh im masha kosev midrash Tilim. We can connect this to what's said in Tilim. Al posuk on the verse Lamanat Seyach LeDavid LaHaskir, which is for the chief musician by David, a prayer of remembrance. What happens over here? It says like this: the Medrash Moshe LeMelech Shohay Eloi Tzoyin v'Koas Aleim. He had sheep and he got angry with them. Godash Tzoyin. He chased them away. V'hiter es adir, and he dismantled their v'hestes, the place where they have where they pasture and all that. V'hefer es aroye, and he said to the shepherd, "You're fired." Okay.
Rabbi Dalfin, we have a siren here. I'm gonna have to go to the safe room.
Okay. Whoever goes has to go. Whoever can stay can stay. After a while, he gathered the sheep, and he rebuilt the corral. That's what they call. And he doesn't mention, and he doesn't say, "Hey, shepherd, I fired you, come back." He doesn't do that. He gathers the sheep that he chased away. He rebuilds the corral, but the shepherd, he doesn't call. Amar Aroya. So the shepherd says, "Hey, the sheep are all gathered. Vahadir banui, and the corral is built. Vani ain't nisker, and I'm not mentioned. What's going on? Why did he leave me out?" Kach. So this is the mashal. Now the analog within the medrash. It's all part of the medrash. He says in the previous chapter, in chapter 69 of Tilim, it says, quote, "Ki Elokim Yoshiat Zion." God will help Zion. V'yivne Ori Yehuda, and Hashem will rebuild the cities of Judah. Harayadir Banui, the quarrel is built. V'yesh Sham, and we'll sit there. V'yeshua, and we will inherit it. V'zer Avadav, and the children of his servants, Yinchalua will inherit it. V'oyav Yishmai, and the lovers of Hashem's name, Yishkuna will dwell there. Harei Hatsoin Mechansois. That means that the sheep are gathered. Vani ain't a nisker, but I'm not mentioned. In other words, Isser, in chapter 69 in Tillim, there we find that there's the sheep, the Yidden, and there's the place, but he's not mentioned. So therefore he says in Kapitel 70, Lamenat Seyach LeDavid Lahaskir. He asks to be remembered. Chaim Zev, in other words, hey, you left me out. Chapter 69 in Tillim leaves out David. So that's why the beginning of chapter 70 begins with Lamenat Seyach LeDavid Lahaskir. Hey, remember me, I'm the shepherd. That's the end of the Midrash. Here comes the Rebbe's questions and explanation. Tzarech Love, we must understand, after he gathers the sheep, and after he's angry at the sheep, and yet he gathers them, means they previously had lost favor in his eyes. He's not interested in the sheep. Nevertheless, he brings it back. You know why? Because once again, Moshe, he got this awakening and arousal that he likes the sheep. It's right, it's a funny message, but that's what it says. That's what happened. So if that's the case, why don't you mention the shepherd? You're upset with the shepherd and you fire the shepherd. And you were upset with the sheep and you threw them out and you broke the coral. You rebuild the coral, you bring back the sheep. Why don't you bring back the shepherd? If you're forgiving the sheep, forgive the shepherd. Therefore, it was necessary to have a special request to forgive the shepherd, which is chapter 70. That's what it says. So the question is, what is it about in this chapter that makes the special request granted and makes David HaMelech ask Hashem to remember him? Says the Rebbe. We're going on to 268. The Rotzen Hu Makiv. The willpower is encompassing. It could be that the willpower will be drawn just in the external. This is what David means when he says, mention the shepherd. A shepherd denotes inner influence. Or better said, today we use the word influencer. Influence represents Isser Pnimius. There is a verse that says there's 7 shepherds and 8 princesses. Nesichim means princesses. And the difference is that the Roya represents Pnimius. The Nesichim represents Chitzonius. I'm not going to go into that. You have it in the notes below if you want to follow up. The Cholzman Shaloi Yeshna Ashpa, next page, Bepnimius Haraya, and as long as you don't have the inner influence, i.e., the shepherd, Chosera Iker, the main thing is missing. Ki Amshochas Hamakiv Ba'atzmo Hi Mechitzoinis Hamakiv. The imposition of the external, which we call the Makiv, remains external. Now, Moshe, you want to know why some people are not inspired? Because they're living with Makif. That's the answer. So when they're shuckling shul because they have a nice bal tefillah, or they're embarrassed for the kids, and therefore they shuckle, or they scream, or they cry, or they laugh, whatever, it doesn't yet mean that it touches them. It means that there's inspiration coming from an outside cause, an outside stimuli that imposes on them. Very nice, very important. But did they change? Did you change? Did I change? So he says, Vagam shatzoin machnas. Though the sheep have been gathered back, and we give them all of their needs, their food, and whatever they need. So how is it possible to say that they don't have a shepherd? If you're giving sheep all their needs, because I'm bringing back these sheep that I was angry on, guess what? What's one of the needs of sheep? What's one of the needs? A shepherd. Otherwise, you have lost sheep. Yeshleima, so the Rebbe is explaining why is it that David has to request in chapter 70 for a shepherd, i.e. himself, David. You would think it's self-understood and automatic, since in chapter 69, he already says that he gathered back the sheep and rebuilt the Karol. Says the Rebbe, Dam Shocha Pnimius, next page. She'al Yedei Harayeh. Because this concept of influence, which comes through the shepherd, this is Limud HaTorah. And this is so true, Chevra. You know, those days when we just did things, all of us, because we just were told to do. And if you don't learn about it, then you don't understand it from Torah, it drifts away. More or less, it drifts away. You have to be learned and studied in Torah to keep the fire going, because Torah brings pnimius. That's the word. Let's continue. Since the Torah of now, of exile, of Golus, is not compared to the Torah of Mashiach, we understand that we are still lacking the true shepherd. But wait a minute. This chapter 70 until and follow 69, and 69 is talking about rebuilding Judah. When is that going to be, Yehuda? When Mashiach comes. There won't be fighting in Yehuda and Shomron. It belongs to us, not belongs to us, and everything else. It's ours. It's open. That's Mashiach's time. What's going to be when Mashiach comes? It's going to be transcendence of godly energy. Next page. And that was David Melech Mashiach. David the Melech Mashiach. So that's what David is asking. David is requesting of Hashem that you make the Mashiach experience real through the learning of Torah. In other words, David knows that it's not yet Mashiach's time. We're in Golus. But we have something in Golus that is similar, that gives us the ability to tap into Mashiach energy, which is through learning Torah. So that's why he says, remind me, Lamanatseach Mizmor LeDavid Lahaskir, first three words of chapter 70 in Tehillim, because he's asking to be remembered. The remembrance itself expresses the pnimius. You can't get the pnimius if you don't remember. I say it always, because I'm in the business of memory, writing memories. Memories isn't just the past. People say, why are you always talking about the past, thinking about the past? Yesterday I spent hours researching my mother's family from Krasnoshilsk, Poland. And I got emails now, very interesting emails back from the Ringelbaum Center out in Poland, the Warsaw, right? I'm like in a different world. Why? Like, why? It's so many years. It's like past. We got to deal with what's on the ground now. The answer is, to me, I see it as now, because if I understand better what took place and where people are and the trajectory, it to me it's fresh. I live it now, even though I'm an American, we're in a free world and all of that. But it enhances so much. I told you, Moshe Dayan said, and my wife said I should check with someone who used to say the same thing to her in school in Melbourne, her principal, that Moshe Dayan said that he was helped by knowing Tanakh in the 6-day war. He was able to understand the logistics on the ground, right? So history, if you take it the right way, it's alive. Let me continue. And this is Havon of Asogas HaTorah B'tachas HaShleimus. So David HaMelech is asking of Hashem, when we say Tehillim, David has a request. He has a bakosha. He says, Hashem, give us the ability to tap into your pnimius through learning of Torah. That's the way the Rebbe reconciles his kapitel Tillim of his upcoming year with the overall concept in the Maamar. Anything anyone want to say or share? Anything? You should have I just it's hard to fathom. It's hard to fathom what there's no menucha. No menucha. Like what does Hashem want? What? Yeah. I understand. We have Chassidus, we have Torah, but if you have to go away in middle because there's a zakah, that's not menucha. The Gashmias, Baruch Nias, I don't know what's going on, Baruch Nias. But the Gashmias, so the Bakosha, there's no contradiction between asking. I mean, my davening Shabbos, it was one of the things I'm thinking about, that there should be Poshet Menucha in Eretz Yisrael. Poshet Kipshuta, rest, peace. Not running from shelters here and there. And I was telling Yisser, my daughter lives, in Tel Aviv. I mean, you can't imagine. There it's so much more than by you guys. It's and they have little children, and they don't have in their apartment a shelter. The Hashgacha Pratis, I'll tell you, a year and a half ago, when there was, also the previous war, not with Iran, with the Hamas, Yamach Shemam, and all that, and there were the rockets and all that. So she has an international school, happens to be in the same building that the Chabad started a school in the 1920s, and where Rabbi Yoel Khan learned as a boy. And where my father, he didn't learn that, but he knew about it. Anyway, it's a very, very important historical place. 16 Harav Cook, 2 blocks from the ocean. I've told you that. So my daughter made there a school, an international school. So American parents feel comfortable because they're getting the English. They know the English, and they also get some Hebrew, and they get Yiddishkeit, Torah, So they came to her. They said, "There's no," and that's a building from probably the turn of the century. We can't send the kids. I mean, so we need a shelter. We need a miklat. She says, "We don't have one. We'll pay for it." Some of them are very wealthy, from the wealthiest families in the world, live in Tel Aviv, and they went to the school, and they paid, I think, $75,000 in. And the miklat was up, and I said to her, "You're renting this place, $75,000." I said, "You got to tell them that in a year or two, and she's moving out because she's double and triple the school, this student enrollment, so she's moving out this upcoming year." Meanwhile, they're putting in $75,000. So she told them. She said, and they said, even if it's just for a few months, we want a miklat. We want our kids, and we need them to go to school. I mean, that's the level of wealth that these people have. That for them it's no big deal. What's the Hashgacha Pratis? That now she and the kids have been most of the day sleeping in the miklat because they live on the 4th floor in their building. To run down, she once already broke her leg or injured herself, fractured. Okay. Because it's all the way in the basement. So now, when they've been sleeping there, so the miklat that was made for the school is partially helping her and the kids have a normal night's sleep. Lefiyerech. Now, I'm just saying, you look back, like, I remember I was upset. I said, how can you take people's money for a miklat for a few months, a year? It's a lot of money, and I was very uncomfortable with it, and I was discouraged. I said, I don't know what to tell you, move out to another place. He said, no, this is what they want, and we're doing it. And Baruch Hashem, they have no tinus. No, in fact, they helped her, find a new building, and with the rent and everything, I'm just saying. So you have to in these situations, Chevra, you got to find the good things in life and the nisim and what the Eibishter is doing bechazda. We don't understand the global plan. V'chulu. I mean, Trump keeps on saying. I don't like when he says it. I don't know how you feel. He says, "Oh, by attacking Iran, I saved Israel from annihilation." I hate when he says that. But he says that. You've heard that, right? You've read that. You know, he says because they could have had it. He says within 2 weeks they would have had a nuclear, an atom bomb, and a nuclear, and then God forbid, you know, who knows? Who knows? Who knows? But I just hope that Hashem will really take care once and for all, so that. Anyway, gotta go, Chevra. Have a great day. It should be Shalom Amiti, and we'll see everyone tomorrow. Zay Gesund. Take care.
Right.